For the last month, Canada's capital city has been laid siege by hundreds of trucks as part of a protest against mandated vaccines. Ottawa has been paralysed by truck drivers opposed to a government requirement to produce digital proof of vaccination when crossing the US-Canada border.
But the Freedom Convoy movement has now evolved into a rallying point against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government's public health measures. Glen McGregor is a reporter with CTV News in Ottawa, and he says the protests have global implications.
This began, as you said, with an objection to a fairly narrow requirement affecting a small number of truckers who had not been vaccinated. And the overwhelming number of Canadian truckers who actually have had both shots, somewhere around 90%. So it's a small group. But the government put in place in January a requirement that if they were to cross over the border into the United States and then come back into Canada, they would have to be vaccinated. They'd previously been exempt from that requirement that had already applied to just normal travelers. And at the same time, the U.S. put in there the same requirement as well. So Canada's requirement is kind of mooted by the fact that anybody driving into the United States, driving a big truck, is going to have a proof of vaccination. But it's really mushroomed into something much larger, and it's brought a lot of groups together, people who are just kind of frustrated with the pandemic, opposed to mandates in any kind, including ones that are enforced by our provincial governments that require you, if you're going to a restaurant, you have to show a vaccine passport on your phone, or if you're traveling domestically within Canada, you have to have a proof of vaccination there as well. And then it's just kind of grown into this big protest against COVID mandates in general, people who don't like mask mandates, people who don't like lockdowns. But it's sort of largely become, though, taken over by this anti-government sentiment. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is really not popular with these people who are here demonstrating in Ottawa, and they are using this as forgive the expression, a vehicle to channel that protest. Some of them are getting really out on the radical fringes, essentially calling for the government to resign and allow them to take control, the protesters, in sort of a ruling junta in cooperation with the Canadian Senate and our Governor General. So it's not going to happen. It's a bizarre claim, but it's being really treated as, by some people, seeing it this not just a protest against what was originally a policy affecting not too many people, but now really, in some eyes, an attempted kind of insurrection.
Well, as the protest motives start to evolve, we know that a state of emergency has been declared in Ottawa. What does that mean? We know, too, that the protests are slowly being dispersed by police as well, but are we about to see maybe the army on the ground as well, trying to disperse the more stubborn protesters?
Yeah, that's an open question, whether the federal government will deploy the Canadian forces, because the police here in Ottawa are simply overwhelmed. They don't have the numbers to deal with this, and the truckers are very entrenched. We have big rigs parked right in front of our Parliament buildings, literally in front of the Prime Minister's office. There are dozens of trucks, porta potties there to support them. There's lots of children there. They brought bouncy castles even to amuse the kids, and that's a real concern for police, because they don't want to go in there and try and remove these people forcibly if there are children present, and they're also concerned there might also be firearms in some of those big rigs. So yesterday, the Premier of the province of Ontario imposed a state of emergency and got an injunction, but that was really more aimed at not at the protest in Ottawa, but a parallel protest in Windsor, Ontario, about 8 hours to the west, and a bridge that connects Canada to the United States, an extremely busy trade route called the Ambassador Bridge. Protesters have been there about 4 or 5 days. Just this morning, we saw police beginning to move in to dismantle that protest. And the reason why the provincial government acted so quickly is it is potentially devastating to Ontario's economy, Canada's economy too, because it's such a key supply route, and it's crucial to the auto industry, which is highly integrated between Windsor and across the river in Detroit. And people are losing their jobs at auto factories temporarily. Factories don't have enough parts to keep the assembly lines going, having to shut down shifts. So that's why we're seeing these pictures, new pictures today coming in this morning from Windsor, Ontario, of police moving in, towing away vehicles. No reports of any arrests yet, but it's likely we'll hear some by the end of the day.
Okay, so the focus here is on Ottawa, and the focus here is on that crossing, that border crossing. But what about the rest of Canada? What is the general perception about these protests?
Well, there's sort of broad support amongst people who are frustrated with the pandemic. And, who isn't frustrated with the pandemic? But at the same time, I mean, we've got some early public opinion research on this, that generally people kind of see their point and support their right to protest, but they don't like the way they're doing it. And they don't like the way they're essentially occupying and paralyzing a major metropolitan city that happens to be also the capital of a G7 country. And as this thing goes on, some of the stories we're hearing out of it are becoming more alarming. We're hearing about people being abused on the street, people yelling at them to take off their masks. These are people who live downtown, horn honking. So they're not making a lot of friends across the country. And I think maybe the support for that is eroding. But at the same time, there are these other parallel protests, including one in Alberta, which is the seat of Canada's energy industry. And truckers temporarily shut down that border to the United States, cutting off the flow of energy products, oil, and also some produce and beef as well. So, and then we had another one in Manitoba. So there is a movement across the country. This seems to be inspiring a lot of people, but so far the numbers are small. The protesters have massively overestimated their own numbers. Their organizers were circulating figures in the international media of 500,000 people converging in Ottawa. It's not true. At its height, it was, police estimate, possibly 18,000. There wasn't 50,000 trucks in Ottawa, as they claimed, only a couple of hundred. But still, this is spreading across the country. There are sympathetic movements that are coming, start launching their own protests in other cities. And then, of course, we see this around the world, and including in Australia.